Welcome to the regular meeting of the Finance and Facilities Committee of the School District of Waukesha. First order of business today is the meeting properly posted.
Yes, it is.
Okay. Next order of business is opportunities for citizens to speak or correspondence. I have no correspondence. I don't see any citizens here to speak tonight. So we'll move on to adjournment to executive session per Wisconsin statutes 19.85 1E for the purpose of consideration of student transportation contract negotiations. Do I have a motion to that effect? So moved. So moved, Mr. Caffrey. Do I have a second? Okay, I guess voice vote, I guess, right?
Yeah. Mr. McCaffrey?
Aye.
Mr. Como?
Aye.
Ms. Madden? Ms. Rajatek? And Mr. O'Brien?
Aye. Motion passes 5-0. We'll move into executive session. We'll move right down to the next committee issues, which is our action items. We actually only have one action item today, which is the monthly vouchers. Any comments from anyone on the monthly vouchers?
Yeah, no questions were received.
Do I have a motion for approval? Mr. Como?
I move to approve as presented.
Motion, Mr. Como, second, Mr. McCaffrey. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None opposed. Motion passes 5-0. Information item, monthly budget update. Are we still on budget, Mr. Clark?
Yes, everything's looking good. The only couple of things to point out, the main thing on the revenue side that'll throw our comparisons off a little bit is that OPEB settlement was booked in December. Obviously, we don't get a settlement every December, so in comparison to last year and next year when we're comparing this year to the following year, it'll skew the numbers, but otherwise, if you factor that out, we're right where we were last year in terms of revenues so far to date. Salaries and benefits are within 0.1% of budget of where we were last year. Capital objects is the only expenditure. It's a little higher, but we had a wireless upgrade, and that was just a timing issue. Again, not a similar project was done the year before, so it causes a little bit of a skew in comparing the two. Otherwise, everything looks good, and everything appears to be on budget through December 31st.
Mr. Como?
Just one quick question, Darren, regarding state sources and federal sources under revenues. We had mentioned about mid-paragraph there, federal grant claim payments, ID and title are still behind this year. What kind of dollars are we looking at? Is that significant? Does it impact our cash flow is really what I'm...
No, it's not gonna cause us to go
insignificant.
to have to draw on our line of credit.
Okay.
In comparison to our overall revenue, no, it's not.
That's where I was going.
The only question I have, Darren, with that OPEB settlement, does that impact our numbers going into that calculated complex formula?
It does impact our aid, and actually the Fund 38 refinancing is coming up later in the agenda. We'll be touching on that. But yeah, that's one of the things we had to factor into and how we wanted to go about addressing the loan we have outstanding is really how do we want the aid to play out.
Because the biennium budget's coming up this year, right? So if there is an issue with that, then I suppose we could ask our legislature portion of the, if you get a big legal settlement, that should not be part of the funding formula.
And actually the revenue from the settlement's actually beneficial to us. It's since we're negative aided, it's beneficial to you. It's the timing of the expenditure that causes negative aided districts to have the fluctuation in their aids.
Let's make sure we address the negative side first, not the positive side.
You could draft a letter to hit on the important side of it.
Because, it's a minor issue. It's not something that, it's a minor issue to anyone else but us, I think. So I don't think it'd be something he'd get a lot of pushback on. And it would look good because essentially helping out the school district instead of not helping out the school district. And I think we do have friendly legislators right now that represent us. So. Any other questions on the budget update? Well, next information item is our South High School cafeteria project.
Yeah, I asked Glenn to come. If you remember, as part of our budget deliberations for this year, we had set aside $1 million to renovate the cafeteria at South High School. So that's in place, and over the last 6 to 8 weeks, Glenn and I have been meeting with staff, with Aramark, with South staff, Aramark, and our architect about the project. So there's an RFP out there right now. It's attached to your executive summary. The walkthrough is actually happening later this week, and bids will be back. So I plan on coming back to you in February to get formal approval of the project. So one thing that, you know, we'll need approval in February if we want to get this work done in the summer of 2017, because it's a pretty tight time window for construction to take place. So I wanted Glenn and I just to put this on the agenda today to just go over any questions you might have, or maybe it's questions that we would bring answers back to you in February. I have a map here of the area in question that we're looking at doing. This is just the south cafeteria and kitchen. So that's the scope of the, I don't know if the cafeteria makes it look, the seating area of the cafeteria makes it look like a lot more of it's being touched than probably will end up being impacted, besides maybe some paint or whatever. But the other thing I wanted to do is advertise a little bit. We're in the process of taking all of our buildings blueprints and getting them in an electronic format like this, so we can easily pull up areas for you. It calculates square footage automatically. It'll be a tool that I'm actually going to do a report in April or May, just to kind of show you the functionality of it. But getting back to the construction project itself, it's been budgeted for. It's just a placeholder budget until you get people in there and designing. One of the things that's delayed us, rather than us having this conversation in September, October, is we switched to Aramark, and I wanted Aramark to run that cafeteria for a few months to get a idea of the good and the bad with, you know, student flow, et cetera. So if you have any questions, Glenn and I are here to answer those. Otherwise, as I said, we'll come back in February with a recommendation to proceed, assuming the bids come in favorable.
Question. The number here, is that the square footage? The number under?
Yes, the red?
We're not changing the footprint?
No. No, the
thought it was
in
suggested.
terms of, we can't add square footage to the building. The Fund 50 fund balance that we're using to finance this
Okay.
doesn't allow
Does not allow,
for
okay.
the expansion of, now the walls within this area,
Right.
like the study hall that's room 104,
Right.
that's in play. But making south
Not gonna-
larger in square footage,
Right.
no, that is not what we're looking to do at this point.
But we're looking to take some other,
In this kitchen, Glenn attended South, but this kitchen hasn't been touched since you were there, or probably since the building was constructed. Is that a fair
Yeah, that's fair.
summary?
Actually, it hasn't been touched since '56, except for some minor cosmetic and some equipment replacement.
right.
But as far as the way the kitchen functions and the serving lines function, it's been the exact same way since the school opened.
And this whole area is like that? I mean, I can't believe how small the cafeteria is,
Yeah.
actually. Largest school right now, right? It's our largest high school?
I believe.
Yeah,
It is, right?
enrollment-wise, yeah.
Enrollment-wise. I mean, I can't believe how small the cafeteria is.
Ms. Ronchek?
Yeah, I'm going to
Tiny.
comment on that because my son's eating lunch at 10. Will
Like
this
a late breakfast.
will this affect
Second breakfast.
how the kids will, what times the kids will eat lunch? Will they be able to have, so they're not expanding that cafe into any part of the kitchen, so they take out that study hall and maybe storage lockers or whatever, and can they utilize any of that space to fit more kids in there, or is there no talk about switching, letting there be more kids in that space at one time eating?
Well, we're looking at that. The reason for the walkthrough is to get the idea from some of the experts that do this all the time. Can we push the kitchen back into room 104 and the other areas back in that area and expand where the serving lines are now? Can we expand the cafeteria into that area? We don't know that until they come and look at it and let us know what they think they need for square footage for an updated kitchen area and serving line, we won't have that answer whether or not we can expand that cafeteria area, seating area, until after that.
Okay, so it's gonna be Aramark, the people that are sending in the RFPs, or, I'm sorry, sending in their bids, and you all walking through there and saying, this is what we need, this is the new functionality of the cafe and how it works, what do you propose that we do with this space?
Exactly what we're gonna do.
Okay,
In fact, I've asked them to look at it while the cafeteria was in action. We could have looked at it early in the morning or late in the afternoon, but Darren and I talked and we said, no, let's bring them there so they can see the kitchen in action and the serving line in action, so they can get a good grasp of what we're trying to do there, along with Aramark suggestions. Epstein Ewing's actually hired a kitchen specialist, if that's what you want to call them, to take a look at it for us too. We're asking the sales staff to join us. So we're getting all the players together and doing the walkthrough and determining those types of things.
okay, thank you.
Mr. Como?
Is there an exception process that we could possibly go through with DPI on using the dollars for expansion versus just renovation?
Can ask that question.
I noticed, in this letter that we had mentioned a phase 2 possibly expanding out into the parking lot east.
East, yes.
Yeah, to help with the seating arrangement, to increase seating space.
Seating and flow of kids, both will be the goal of that. But we have that as phase 2. We want it in the plan for our larger facility conversations we might be having at some point, so we know what we want that to look like. So we wanted to have it part of these conversations.
That makes sense. I mean, especially if we want to do that in the future. But if there's an exception that DPI, maybe there's a process we can go through. Take a peek at that.
Check.
And I know I was on camera when I said 10 o'clock. It could be 10 something, but because my children exaggerate, I have to eat lunch at 10 o'clock. It's probably 10 something, so just wanted to clarify that. And then that space that you're talking about between that cafeteria and the parking lot, I don't think they use that for anything besides there's a dumpster there, but that's just, 20, 30 feet of grass space.
Some grad, I don't know how.
Yeah, maybe
there's
not that
probably
much.
about 15, 20 feet of grass space. And as we looked at it realistically, if you moved out even a little bit farther, the amount of parking spots you would lose could definitely be made up. When you look in the main parking lot, it's nowhere near to capacity anyway. So if we went that route and pushed out to the east, we could easily do that and still accommodate the parking for the students.
The other item in the executive summary I should probably mention, right now, we have just under $2.2 million in fund balance in Fund 50. The $1 million was, we really, at that point, we really didn't have a firm budget. It was just kind of I asked Epstein, what's the normal per square foot cost of a renovation like this? So that was a pretty rough number, just to give you an idea of what we're looking at of available funds. I'm not saying we should spend $2.2 million on this cafeteria, but just so you know the fund balance that we do have.
Okay, go ahead.
Oh, looking at
Sorry.
Glenn. And one last thing, I was asking Todd about this money to be utilized for something else, and he said this fund, it has to be used for the cafeteria purpose.
Food service
Any food
related
service.
cost.
Okay.
So my question is, and just real quick, is this is an outer wall right here, is that correct?
Yep.
So that's the parking lot that way. When you guys were talking about flow, were you thinking that you'd flow in and flow back out, or were you just gonna use one hallway in and out of the cafeteria?
In our initial walkthrough, I know one person said that, but we were walking with, I think Aramark actually said it, because it reminded them of a school that I think at Appleton School, actually. But I haven't heard that from the architect, I haven't heard that. But that was the conversation, is to kind of create a horseshoe, to shoot them, to bring them in here and out, or maybe it was vice versa, but I think it was in here and out that way, to create a loop, but again, I don't know if that
I
was.
guess the question would that be beneficial versus just this, is a horseshoe arrangement really beneficial to the way we're set up there? I kind of doubt that, right? So, on this wall on the outside, is there walkouts that way from the kitchen, what's shown as the study hall? Or is that a hard, solid wall?
No, there's a solid wall in the cafeteria, actually a window wall, going to the east. In the kitchen, there is a small service door that goes outside, and then right next to that, there's the hallway, the industrial ed hallway that goes out into the parking lot. I'm talking about the,
Yeah, I see that, that's exit.
But the study hall is a wall, it's a window.
Is there a rule against the kids being outside the building during lunch? Probably not, as long as they don't go off campus. Go off
think about
campus.
campus, yeah.
Just, in fact, you don't want to get by the door. It's the bigger kids too, they'll just.
You don't want to be a pick and save at lunchtime either.
Because as, you know, other than, well, global warming, who knows? But other than a few months of the year, maybe
Still praying, Kurt.
yeah, maybe there's an avenue for an outdoor place that we could design into, right?
Yeah.
And so some kids could sit outside and relax outside in the sun instead of being inside a building all day long.
Right.
Yeah, that's true. They don't
They could still be outside in the sun versus, you know,
And all their garbage.
bring your own lunch, you'd have more time.
And that's one thing we're hoping to get from the remodel is to get them through the lines faster so they do have more time to pause and have a little peace and quiet if possible.
because, you know, if it's crowded in here, having an outdoor atrium, outdoor open, but just a nice clean area, it'd take away some of our parking space. I guess you don't really park there probably anyway, but that might be one way of creating more space for 4 or 5 months of the school year, at least half the school year. Check.
Can you see this, Darren? This green? Is that what you were proposing to make a hallway so that it's a horseshoe in and out?
Can't,
That's what someone mentioned in the walkthrough, but we don't have the funds available. We can't add square footage. Again, that was just one person in a walkthrough. I mean, there's a lot of ideas being thrown around. But we, you know, that kind of, we could add, you know, the nice thing is if we ever wanted to, those parking spots are available to be renovated into something else, whether it's an outdoor venue or adding square footage or whatever.
I think, you know, if we had a canopy out here, and that's not adding square footage, it's still outside, right? And people could sit outside and canopy type structure. It'd look kind of neat, to be honest with you, and be different than just sitting them inside a building all day long.
Cafe Au South?
Yeah. You'd have to have a special pass to sit out there. They'd have to pay an extra $15 a month.
Yeah.
Recoup those parking spaces.
Mr. Como?
So, is that truly a study hall right now? That used to be, wasn't that the teacher room?
Years ago, it was the teacher's lounge.
And then,
yes.
wasn't it used for, I think, engineering for a while? Or was that not used for engineering? Maybe that was just being considered for that one
I don't
point?
think it's ever been, it was considered, but I don't think it's ever been used for engineering. Yeah, for a couple of years, it was a storeroom.
And it is a study hall
But
now?
now they use it as a study hall.
And are we looking at reusing any of the equipment, or are we throwing out all the kitchen stuff, or how?
No, a lot of, I shouldn't say a lot, some of the equipment, and I think a fair share of it, it's stuff we've bought recently, and it'll be designed to continue to use the newer purchases that we've made.
Okay.
So yes, some of the equipment will be, some of it I'm assuming just.
Some of it will go away, but there's a fair share that's fairly new that will be, like Darren said, incorporated to make sure it fits into the design that we're putting.
It'd be nice to get a sense of how much we're keeping and reusing versus how much we're throwing out. Same thing for like seats, student seats, tables. Is that all gonna be new, or is that just old stuff going out, or?
Actually, those tables are all brand new this year,
Oh, okay.
so.
And part of that equipment conversation could also be.
I was remembering last year's, I guess, so haven't been there this year yet.
Part of that equipment conversation could also, us be moving something that's at South currently to another school, and then maybe South ends up with a new, but there's a trickle down benefit of that
Sure.
as well, so.
But getting a sense of that reuse would be really good. And are we looking at designing some new spaces too in terms of, I know Aramark had suggestions in terms of various carts and different formats to present the food. I'm assuming that's part of this, rolling some of those things into it?
Yeah, what the newer cafeterias I've seen in high schools, you have more of that food court kind of feel to it, instead of just the kind of assembly line feel.
Right.
And I think that'd be Aramark's preference, is to have that. Again, the more lines and it's well laid out, you can turn those kids over quicker. It gives them more time to eat. So that's what, if you were to ask me what I'm kind of envisioning, is that food court feel as well.
Check.
So I'm uneasy when you guys say throwing out any old kitchen scraps. That's like scrap metal, stainless steel. If something doesn't work, do we at least take that somewhere and get money for it? We don't throw it out, do we? Okay.
Absolutely, we do that.
Okay, thank you.
So, I mean, the latest school that I know that's done their cafeteria is from scratch, you know, when Muskego built their new high school. I don't think if there's another newer school. Muskego would be one to, you know, latest right now. I know they have a coffee bistro or something like that. Coffee that the kids run. It's part of the business group. Yeah, fresh bakery and coffee. Mr. Como.
So what's the process look like here? You had mentioned we need to get done, if we wanted to do this summer, we'd have to have approval in February. So what's that process look like to get from where we are today, which is an idea?
So.
And I know you guys have done more work, but,
The, on page 2 is the timeline in terms of getting us to the interview and roughly the selection. By February 1st, we will have done the walkthrough, reviewed the proposals, and interviewed, you know, the top handful of companies to come in. And then the finance, we meet, I think it's the 6th or the first full week in February. We meet, that proposal would come to you. In terms of the approach we're gonna take, we're thinking that it's gonna be a design build rather than a fully engineered, just for, you know, the size of the projects, you know, on the smaller size in terms of construction. That'll give us additional time and be able to fit into that 10 or 11 week window. So we hope to have signed contracts and everything by the middle of February and begin that design phase right then.
So far, I have 5 committed. Yep.
And the other ones could show.
Yeah,
Those are ones that just thanked us for for getting the RFP, so.
Just keep in mind, I mean, we're in a competitive business, right? So we gotta, whatever we do, it has to be something that attracts people to the district.
And we have a lot of people from outside of the district in South's facility on a weekly basis with the pool and the field house. And so I do think there's a benefit when looking at it in a PR sense as well.
Yeah, and you can see that cafeteria when they are coming to the field house or the pool. It's all just right there.
Or we hope to have that.
Okay, well, I guess that was a good update. And let's move on to the next item, budget development.
Next month I'll be.
Thank you, Mr. Norder, by the way. Always good to see you.
drive
Enjoy your
safe.
evening.
Don't be a stranger. Come back more often.
Next month, I'll be presenting a long-range or a multi-year budget forecast. So I just wanted to share the assumptions that we're looking to. I won't walk you through all of them, but keep in mind, though, as this projections being done, as Mr. O'Brien mentioned earlier, the state's beginning at the end of this month. The state biennial budget for the following 2 years is going to be debated in Madison, so these assumptions, I'm sure, will be somewhat fluid as we follow proposals, et cetera, but a few of the key ones are the revenue limit multiplier that's been at 0 per pupil. I'm gonna leave it there. Resident enrollment, I'm gonna budget a decline of 125 resident students. The voucher program, again, that's only been in place 2 years, so it's hard to, you don't have a lot of data points to get a trend going. But we went from 69 to 110 roughly, so I'm gonna budget that kind of growth one more time. And also with that voucher program, the number of kids who can participate in that program grows every year now. It grows by 1% of your enrollment over the next 9 years. So we'll keep that in mind as we go forward as well. Health insurance, I'll probably put a 5% increase in there for health insurance. Obviously, that's a big driver on our cost. Aid's always the hardest thing to project, so what I plan on bringing you next month or in March is, if you remember, we did scenarios. You basically know what your revenue limit's going to be within a pretty high degree of accuracy, is running it with a 2% drop in aid, no change in aid, and a 2% growth in aid. And I usually go with the negative 2%. But really what we're trying to do at that February meeting is, it's not an aid tax levy conversation, is of all of our revenue sources, can we pay our expected expenditures, regardless of how that fund. The second step in that conversation is getting to that aid tax, comfort level. So keep that in mind as we're looking at those numbers. The calendar's attached as well. In February, as I mentioned, we'll look at the long-range budget forecast. I put in there September 13 as the tentative budget hearing date. I'm just kind of going off of what we've done the last couple of years, but you, as the board, or the full board, gets to make that decision on that date. And then in October, I have in there, we have that weird timing with our meeting in October being before final aid is known, final voucher participation levels are known. So again, we'll just have to look at how we want to roll that out between us meeting, that data coming in final budget approval. Do we want to have an extra finance meeting, sneak one in there so you at least have a chance to see the final numbers. 99.9% of the budget isn't changing. It's just those minor tweaks, if you remember, on the tax levy, once those voucher levels are known and the aid's known. So I just wanted to lay those out and see if there's any questions on this. Otherwise, we'll be bringing back some budget information next month for you to consider or to review.
Darren, when we do there's a point comes back from a correction in our audits sometime back that we now approve the budget transfers during the year. When, is that on our calendar someplace? Do we put that in our calendar?
Now, this is the budget development for next year. The transfers that you do during the year is for the current budget year. And normally those, well, from my 1 year experience of doing it here, is those will start coming in February and March. And actually, the next agenda item is that Fund 38 debt refinancing. Your approval to pay off that loan, if you do approve it, that'll really come in the form of a budget amendment and transfer. So those will be coming. We'll probably do one in February or March, and then one towards the end of fiscal year, once things are getting close to final.
Just want to make sure we always have that kind of scheduled where we just annually do that. Formality, because if we don't, the auditor said that you guys are spending money that you really haven't approved,
Right.
Right.
So that is.
Now it's something you can easily avoid.
Okay. Any questions on the budget development calendar for anybody? Okay, good. We'll move right along. This thing called Fund 38 loan repayment discussion. Last item today.
Yeah, we touched on this a little bit earlier. As you know, we received just over $5.5 million in the final settlement in December, so that part of this conversation is set in stone. We received it, we've booked those proceeds in this fiscal year, but really the conversation is about the loan that we have outstanding, the Fund 38 loan tied to this issue, and how do you go about repaying it. So what I can tell you, and again, there's kind of two parts to this conversation. There's if I pay it off now, how much interest do I save? And that's truly reducing your expenditures. But the other side of it is, how do you want the impact to be on the aid formula? Because all those numbers at the end get, once you're audited, get rolled into the state calculation. And what we're trying to avoid is spikes up and down with the tax rate because of a one-time cash settlement. So we're looking to kind of smooth that, and what's the best approach to that. The problem with aid is it's by far the most difficult thing to sit here and explain. I did include on the back of this executive summary the aid formula, and
That's funny.
I know, that's why I come to you with the budget up 2%, down 2%, or even, because to get into the nuts and bolts of it's pretty dry, to be honest. But just looking at that page, that aid formula, I'll just tell you what I did, is our expenditures as a district are relatively consistent. You know, the revenue limit's been pretty much flat for the last several years. So I took the aid formula calculation that was certified in October, and I went in and I did the adjustments, and I footnoted my adjustments, what we would need to do. And I pretended that this settlement came last year, and I put them into last year's expenditures that are reflected here, and said, okay, if this would have happened last year in comparison to what did happen, where would the aid fall out? Okay, so and I won't walk you through it, but, you know, you have to bring it into Fund 10, transfer it to 38, yada, yada, yada. But, so I think that's a fair comparison. So when you're looking at how to handle this, when that revenue comes in, it's called the deductible receipt, and it reduces your costs. So what I'm recommending is that we go ahead and pay off the loan. We'll save $290,000 roughly of interest expense. The deductible receipt will negate the expenditure in the same fiscal year. So there really is no aid impact, and it'll give you that stability in the tax rate that you're looking for. We'll actually get a little bit of an aid advantage in our certification next year, because the revenue's still significantly higher than what the expenditure is. You're looking at revenue of $5.5 billion, to pay off the debt's about $4.3 million. So there's still a benefit to us in aid. Over time, we were going to pay off that loan. So over time, it kind of balances itself, but in this 2-year window here where you could have a swing, this is the evenest way to go about doing it in terms of shared costs. So I know that's a really odd summary, but that's the way the aid formula works. I tried to, on this page 2 of the summary, lay out the shared costs.
Just a quick question before you, just for clarity in my mind. When we talk about aid, it's the split between what we receive locally versus we receive in state aid. It doesn't affect our total revenue limit. It has no impact on our revenue limit. So all we're talking about is not whether the school district gets more money or less money. All we're talking about is managing it so that we maximize our state aid so we can keep the property tax rate as low as possible.
Right.
So people have a sense of what we're talking about here. We're not talking about getting more money or less money out of this deal.
Not only make the rate as low as possible, but also provide some level of stability to the rate.
So it doesn't make sense to say, because there's a shift in state aid, we shouldn't pay this off, because our revenue limit is unaffected by it. We still get the same amount of revenue. It's just a matter of who pays, okay? And right now, we're paying more money out than we're taking in for really no reason at all, now that we have the cash to pay it off.
Exactly. Yeah, the aid is just that's a good point. It's not additional revenue. And I always say that when we get into the biennial budget discussions, politicians love talking about increased aid to school districts, but that's not increased revenue to school districts. It's buying down the local levy. That's, I'm not sure they're not confused by it themselves, but when citizens read it, they think, well, you're getting more aid. It's revenue. It's not the way it works. So, again, if we pay off, the amortization schedule on the debt is on page 1. You know, we're almost, you know, the nice thing is we don't have much debt left out there anyways, but to me, it's clearly the best path to go ahead and pay it off. Still get some aid benefit next year from the variance of the expenditure from the revenue we got. And on top of it, the true savings is the $290,000 in interest. And aid's a confusing thing, but again, that balances out over time. But the 290 is a true gain. We also gained some budget flexibility because this $1 million debt payment that we have sitting out there for the next few years comes out of revenue limit dollars. We'll now have some flexibility. Flexibility in a year where we're heading into a state budget where we don't know what our funding is going to be, so that's always a good thing to have. And closure, I think, is also the last benefit that will on the whole topic.
I like that one.
So, once we pay this off, our total amortization of all existing debt would be completed in what year?
I don't think I brought my budget. I think the energy efficiency projects run till, I want to say 2021, I think that was a 7 or 8 year borrow at the time. I thought I grabbed my budget book. So 21, I think, 22,
Yeah,
somewhere in
double
there.
check it. I thought it was shorter than that, but I think we kept stretching it out. Thought we were 5, but maybe it's 7.
We shot for 5, but we
Yeah, I
ended
think
up
they
with
were,
7.
we jumped.
Okay.
It's still, for a district this size, we have no referendum approved at whatsoever. In terms of our annual budget, the Fund 38 budget or Fund 38 outstanding debt is very, very low.
So, you know, if you, it's factoring all these things in. It's the busing savings. We talked about that being about $3 million. Healthcare savings, compensation savings, covering our OPEB thing, and taking care of things as we went, you know, past referendums sometime way back when, and the energy efficiency project is what keeps us from being in a situation where we're going to tell citizens, we really need more money, we should go to referendum. We're not in that situation, as many other districts around the state are all, quite a few of them are talking about referendums right now. We're just not in that situation with the way we've been.
One other thing in terms of this Fund 38 debt is when we passed the budget, we had budgeted to use $1.1 million of fund balance to make an additional principal and interest payment. That'll be part of the budget amendment that you'll be asked to look at. Is there's no, I mean, it all ends up in fund balance eventually, but there's no reason to have that transaction or those journal entries take place. And really at that point, it is just journal entries. So that those funds will return to fund balance, I guess, at that point. So, all good news on this one, I think.
Yep, very good. Any other questions on the loan repayment? Okay, well, I guess that can, now, I almost adjourned the meeting too early last time. Are we all done? Okay. With that, then the meeting's adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody.